Machine here, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel. 20-minute video for 2 minutes worth of content. Gold.
Right, one thing people might not know about the way this year went is, I know people remember, unfortunately, the period where you were replaced by Stanislaw. He came in, he had the major, technically he came in 2 events before that, but people forget that one. He came in, they obviously went as evil geniuses. They got like, I think at one point they were like number 1, number 2 in the world ranked behind Astralis. They obviously won that like ESL New York style. But what people forget before that is, this team was really consistent before then. Like, you guys were basically in every semi-final, like every international tournament, just always in the semi-finals. And a lot of these losses even were like very close. And I remember one detail people won't remember of this era was you guys actually were one of the few teams I've ever seen who played all maps. You actually played every map in the map pool. Like, what was this era like? Because even though, look, in one level, it sucks to always get to semis and then lose close. Like, you're always thinking, I could have done X, Y, and Z. But at the same time, it shows that actually this team, I can't say, I think it's an underrated team in history, mate. Because if we were naming like great NA lineups, a lot of people would forget this team basically was like a permanent fixture in all the tournaments, deep in the tournament, like right where you can normally potentially have a chance to win. Like, this era must have been quite a satisfying period as much as you weren't winning.
Yeah, during this period, to touch on the map thing first, it was easy to add 7 maps just because the map we didn't play was Dust 2. And after like watching the top teams on Dust 2, Chet and I were just like, we could easily just add this map, you know.
Right, I see.
And I think back then there was a few teams, because like we were pretty matchup based. Like the one team we couldn't beat was Na'Vi. We could only beat them on Inferno, and that was it. And then the other team we couldn't beat was Fnatic, I think. We like always lost to them in overtime, or like 16-14. So like if we ever ran into like Na'Vi or Fnatic, then like our run generally stopped. But if we were running into like, and then Liquid obviously, Liquid was like 50-50, or they would win like 70% of the time, we'd win 30%. So there was like a few teams where like we would just lose in semifinals, but adding 7 maps was just a way to try and like win the veto always, and try and like not, because we got countered by a few teams back then.
Because you also had this weird thing that happened in this team, right, which people will know historically is the case, right, which is obviously Stanislaw joined the team, and then he eventually ended up replacing you as the IGL, and that led to you being moved out, right? In this particular case, though, like, first of all, what do you have as a thought on the trend there? Because people have often brought it up famously. Like, obviously, although from the outside, we've all done all sorts of mad skits and angles of like, you know, like the team, who the fuck knows why. The logic goes, as far as I can tell from the players, it's like, right, Daps took us to this point, but now we need, they always say, this is why it's a weird angle, they always say we need more fragging from the IGL role. Now, the reason that's weird, Daps, is, even though the eye test shows Stanislaw's a much better fragger than you, his stats are also pretty fucking bad. Like, it's not like on the raw data of the server, he's not like fragging out like something. He's not fucking Cadian or Jame or something. He's not top fragging the server. So what is your set? Like, why has this happened a couple of times? Why specifically is like Stanislaw seen as the antidote to whatever Daps doesn't do or whatever? Why is that a thing?
I mean, it's not. I wouldn't. I think it's like definitely been blown out of proportion, because like the first time it was just simply like 3 of us could have been cut on Optic, and it just ended up being me, because like stats pretty much. And then on NRG, it was just like TenZ joined, and obviously like a lot of players will go back to history and be like, oh, I won an event with this guy, or like,
sure,
you know, there. And then I knew like even our manager Derek Trong, like when we picked up TenZ, like we knew what was gonna happen eventually, because it's just how he is, in my opinion. But like, I'm not gonna say the player's name, but like I knew after a month of picking up TenZ, I think our only result was like a top 4 or 3rd, 4th at Shanghai. He was already trying to like replace Chet and I, like instantly. So like, I found that out from one of the players he was trying to pick up to replace me, and then it's like, I feel like I just wasn't given like a full chance, because I wasn't a bad caller then. Like statistically, obviously I wasn't holding my own, but you know, we weren't like a team. Like we beat Astralis, like we were beating all the teams.
Yep.
So it's like we just had to put it together eventually. And I think after getting enough 3rd force, it's like it just got easier and easier for him to be like, oh, like we're not going to win with Daps. We can maybe push it over the finish line with this player. And, you know, most of the players on the team are pretty passive, and they eventually folded. So that's just sort of how it went. And I mean, even after they like won some stuff, like they tried to pick me back up twice for Stanislaw. So it's kind of like, because like after a while, Chet was trying to cut tarik and Stan for me and Naf, but then it just wasn't possible because like Chet ended up getting cut by the org, and there was like so much drama, and I don't know. There's been like a lot of like things where I could have came back in different scenarios, but yeah, just how it happened.
How would you characterize what that impulse in tarik is? Because, like, on the one hand, look, it's worked in some of the teams he's been in. Optic did end up winning. Like, Cloud9 rejigged the lineup when he came in. They did win a major. Like, this team had some success. I can't say he had no success with it, but it does seem a bit ruthless. Like, it does just seem like, without seeming rude, which it's hard for me, it does seem a little bit like tarik himself just sort of scoreboard watching and being like, right, get the guy out who has the 10 kills and get the guy with the 14 kills. What is his impulse to change the roster? Because it's happened a lot in the teams he's been in. I'm with you.
I mean, it's definitely like partially stats. I don't want to say he's just like, oh, this guy's bad stats, cut him. But like, there's definitely other reasons. I mean, one of the reasons for sure is like he won with Stanislaw before, like E-League.
Okay.
That was a huge event. So like that has to play a part as well. It's just like we're getting third, fourths. He's like, bro, we're not going to win with this guy. Let's just get a guy I won with before. That's probably another thing. And it's just hard to say. I mean, I just remember like we just wouldn't agree on like how to play either. So that probably also plays a factor. And we had a lot of arguments about the game, and then Chet would like usually agree with me, but like there'd be like pointless conversations that just like wouldn't end, like we wouldn't get to a conclusion. And I think eventually like there was even a point where I was like I should just leave because like Tarik's not gonna get cut. We just picked him up. So Tarik, like I don't have any issues with the guy at a game. Like he's a nice guy, but it's just like in game we just don't work together, and that's just how it is.
Fair enough. As you said, by the way, the thing everyone forgets, and I will always stress it, because I love historical context, is people remember that the Stanislaw lineup not only had beat Astralis when they were at the major, and then had that great semi-final against them, and then afterwards obviously beat them and won New York, and for a while famously they were the only team, and especially when Liquid couldn't do it, they could beat Astralis. Everyone forgets at your last event when you played that Pro League, you also beat Astralis, and here's what I don't like, Daps. You have to pick, fans. You either think, like I do, like, yeah, Astralis obviously did the blast period and was working their way back in form, or you can do what all the fans do, which they tell me they were always great and they were always the best. They were always better than Liquid, and of course they were always going to win that major. So it's like, either Daps gets credit for actually beating Astralis, or he gets credit for beating a slightly worse Astralis, but you did beat them on LAN. A real LAN match. That to be, no matter what people say about their form, that's a big deal when you beat a lineup like that.
Yeah, and we didn't even practice before the event.
Because that was when you knew you were cut, right? Wasn't this where it was like,
2 weeks.
Wasn't it already known it was your last event or something? You just played as like a favour to them or something. Yeah. Okay, so did people just kind of just play and just say, fuck it?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to go to the event because, I mean, why not? It's prize money on the line. I can still like show that I'm good. Yeah. Like I show my worth, and like even just honestly going to that event was like one of the best things ever, because it's just like I got so many calls from orgs after we placed well, so honestly, like raised my stock going to that event. So, yeah, I mean, we were a team that, in my opinion, could beat anyone at the time when we were in good form, but you know, we just failed to push it over the finish line a lot of the time.
Obviously, look, this is the standard question I have asked, but your answer I'm more interested in. Obviously, it must be a bit bittersweet to then see them, like I say, almost be, maybe they could have won the major. They do win championships. They do all this. And it's your players. Like, these are the players you picked. You put together one by one. You putting them in their roles. Like, listen, I'll give Stanislaw credit for the games he called, but like, he'd only just come in 5 minutes earlier. Like, it's not like he built the whole squad up. It's a bit bittersweet, right, to see them all have success without you?
Yeah, it is bittersweet because, like, I'd say the only team that I got cut from that I was sad at getting cut from was NRG, and just like how it went down. But like, it sucks. But as you said, it's bittersweet. It's also like I built that team from 2017, and you know, it's still like nice to see the project do well after I'm not there. like when it turned into EG and then it got destroyed, that's when I was like sad and like disgusted by like what happened essentially.
Let me ask you about some of the players. Now that we've talked about the period when you played with them, just who you thought of them as players. Like, now you played with him for a few years, you've seen him without you, with you. Who is Brehze? Because there was a period of time when he was under you, and then the early period under Stanislaw. Mate, this guy looked like he was going to become like the best 10A player ever. He was really fucking good.
I mean, he's a player who, you know, he's not like a player who's going to like watch 20 demos and like do that kind of stuff. Like, he just has a good feeling for the game, at least when like I was playing with him in my system. And, you know, he would find like timings occasionally. He wouldn't say too much, but he was one of those players where like if he did say something, it was probably correct. So like
right.
he would maybe call something like once a match, and if he called it, I'm like, we're doing what he wants, 100%. Or like he just had so much confidence too back then. Like on train, I think he just anytime he got an Ivy spawn or upper B spawn, he would just take it and like right click a flash and just like peek and just kill 2 every time. Versus like top teams too. Like he just had balls and just like knew what he wanted. And you know, he was pretty to himself, and sometimes he'd make a call here or there, but you know, just a composed player who like didn't really feel pressure and like overall solid.
What about CeRq then? Because again, when you picked him up, he was a prospect, but under you, he became one of the best players in the world. He was actually like the amount of times he was the X factor in an NRG game, and not like a big carry performance was big time.
CeRq again, like he at the start he was super confident and he like thrived off confidence, which you know is I think is an issue he's having now. Is he's a player that I think benefited a lot from the environment we had, because like out of every team I've been on, that was that NRG team is the only team that was kind of like a family.
Yeah, a lot of friends,
like,
right? I noticed even in EG, they were always go out together and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like that team is super close, and I think that's why we rose so fast in 2018, which is because we lived together in Vegas. We had that like kind of connection. It was like 24/7 boot camp essentially, and I think that helped him a lot. And he is a player that just thrives off confidence. If CeRq's not confident, then it's going to force him to play a play style that he's not comfortable with. And whether or not his play style works well in today's meta is another question. But back then, at least, like super confident player, you know, maybe needed to be micromanaged a little bit. But he also wouldn't call it. It was mainly just me and Ethan like telling people what to do most of the time. But yeah, overall, just solid player, super confident, willing to take risks. And again, there was no like repercussions either. Like I wasn't someone who's like, oh, why the fuck are you peeking that? Like I want him to peek and like take these risks because like that's his style. I'm not gonna like force him into like playing like Shiro or something, or some like passive style like Skadoodle or whatever.
Right, obviously after this, I don't know how many people remember it, but you had that brief stint where you were in Cloud9, and the problem you had was they'd already spent all that time and money doing a similar job to what they did with your roster. So if people remember, before that, they had the lineup where it was like fucking Flusher and Kiyashima and Automatic, and they had all those like international players, but they had that issue where they had a nightmare where it was like the main 5 was never available except for like one LAN ever, and they were always bringing people in and out because like one person's mum died and then one person got ill and then one person couldn't attend this event. And so after that, they tried like a similar version of that with you, where you had this mixed team again. And the problem was, I got the vibe from talking to the Cloud9 people. It's like, it's not even that your team was bad, mate. It's just they were just sick of that like spin cycle of like trying all these random names seemingly dropped in a hat, and essentially you would have had to just be really good right out the gate. So like when I look at that one, I always feel like you got a bit hard done by there, mate. Like if you joined Cloud9, first of all, another brilliant org to join. You've had some very good orgs you've joined in your career, but also if someone tells you like you can build a team, if you look at the team you were building, that team makes sense on paper. Like Automatic was still a quality player. People thought he was actually probably the best of the old Cloud9 players at the time. People won't know it now, but like the guy TenZ, who at one point was the best Valorant player, was in this team. He was going to be like the up-and-coming player. You had fucking your boy Mixwell came back. Even, by the way, everyone thinks I'm a meme on Kusta. This was when Kusta had sort of found his spot in the scene and kind of had his role and had his game together. This lineup could have been something, mate. Don't you think it was kind of a bit like you didn't really get much time with it?
It wasn't. That's not really how it worked out, though. Like, it kind of was more like internal things. Like it could have been given more time if like we wanted it to.
Oh, really?
But
Okay.
yeah, like the way it worked out was sort of like Tim wanted to leave at one point, and when I had played with like Mixwell and TenZ and Kusta, we were like the team was mainly like me, Kusta, and Tim. In terms of like being together and like being in the practice room, talking about like micro macro stuff, just how we want to play. TenZ was super young back then and like mainly focused on like his individual play.
Sure.
And then Mixwell as well. I think Mixwell this time being in NA got a little more homesick in my opinion, just from like the vibe I got. And I just knew like if Tim left, we're like pretty fucked, honestly. Because like Tim was like my Ethan on this team. Like Tim was the second hand man, and then Kusta, honestly, like people like shit on this guy so much, but like good teammate, selfless, like can call as well, like pretty good all around player, honestly. Can op as well too, can lurk, can entry. So like Tim, like I won't go into all the details, but like Tim, Kusta, and I like eventually came together and we just decided to like leave Cloud9 to go to Gen.G. And you know, when Tim was leaving, I pretty much just told Jack like it's probably better you just like let us three leave with Tim, because Tim like decided he's not gonna stay. So us three left with Tim, and then I just told Jack, I'm like, it's better if you just like rebuild or buy a team, honestly. Like if I lose Tim, then I don't have faith in the project anymore. It's pretty much what I
So it
told
kind of
him.
was your choice then. If you'd essentially have
Yeah.
stayed, and especially if Automatic had stayed, maybe it just kept running into the next year.
Yeah, like without Tim, like there was no chance for us to like do well, honestly.
I noticed the other thing that I wanted to ask about was not only was TenZ in the Cloud9 lineup, but in the next lineup, when you made the Gen.G team, the joke is you replaced him with Som, who, if people don't know, also then became like a Valorant player. And essentially, like, these are two of the players. You know, when people complain, like, oh, where's all the NA talent? It's just complexity. It's like, bro, they went to Valorant. I'm sorry, like, the people would have been the next top players. So what I wanted to ask was, these two players are both people where, like, these are the most obvious ways you pick a player up. They just have raw mechanics. They look like they have some pop, you know. Do you consider yourself, do you have a good eye for talent? Because when I see you pick up players like this, mate, they're not proven players. Like, you're sort of taking a chance if you pick a player like that. Even if they end up being good, maybe it's not that year with you. Maybe it's in 2 years, they get good, or 3 years. Or like, were you just open to newer players? It seems like you don't have to have a player be proven when you'll pick him up, right?
Like the formula for my teams is usually just like I have to have one person that has experience, like at least played like top CS,
Okay.
been on like good teams. I always have one person that's a risk generally, because it's usually always worth it. And then if they suck, then I can just cut them with it
Yes,
like pass.
sure.
So it like, doesn't really matter. And then you know I just the other two are just should be like all around players, roughly, or like other guy. So that's usually like my formula, roughly. It doesn't always work out that way. And then also with the Cloud9 lineup with the Mixwell and TenZ, like they weren't the first options. I think I was gonna get Poison instead of Mixwell, but I think
Okay.
it didn't end up working out. And Chips was also there's a lot of options. There's a lot of players. Even Hobbit too. I could have picked up Hobbit on Cloud9 before. He's on Cloud9 now. So there's like a ton of options back then, and we just decided to take a risk on TenZ was the risk one, and then Mixwell was more like experienced opper, but it just didn't end up working out that time. Honestly, it just like wasn't a right mix of people, and that's on Gen.G. It was the right mix, like with Som at least, because like Som was like maybe a little worse mechanically than TenZ, but as like a teammate and like the dedication that Som like put into the game and like trying to learn from us was completely different.
Right.
Like Som was more of a sponge of like I want to learn from these guys who have played forever, rather than you know practicing individual stuff. So that was like the big difference in my opinion. And then Bentet was the risk, more of a risk than on Som, honestly, because Bentet, like I talked to him, he had like decent English, but overall, like I didn't know how he played on Tyloo, and I think that looking back, like Bentet's like an awesome guy, but like it wasn't like a good fit looking back, even though we won the first LAN we played.
By the way, look, I understand if I say this statement, I should add the disclaimer. That particular year fucked a lot of people over for obvious reasons. But I always thought your team did get mega blue balled. Because if people don't know, the first LAN was the Dreamhack Open at Anaheim in NA. You guys not only won it, you didn't, I don't think you dropped the map, and the some guy who's the young prospect was the fucking MVP. Like, if you wanted to start a new project, that's about the best start you can have. But then we immediately went online. We had all the bullshit with Flashpoint. Flashpoint 2, you didn't even have the proper lineup anymore. You had standards, and then it just faded out. Like, listen, that's to be a what if, right? Like, what if this had just been a normal year of CSGO, right? It'd be interesting.
Yeah, that was probably like one of the most hard times mentally in my life, for sure. Because like I also had some like health issues that I like ended up resolving, but like I mentally was like not in a good place after like COVID happened. It wasn't like mainly COVID. Like COVID happening obviously sucked, and it was like kind of a shock to everybody, but like having my own health issues, and then just like my mental health kind of deteriorated, and like I kind of started losing motivation, and I'm like, why am I even playing if it's online only? And I kind of just like stopped putting time in, and that's why like that me and Sam eventually left to Valorant, because like it got to the point where I just if no lands were coming back for years, and then like I like Gen.G as an org, but they also like blocked changes I wanted to make, which kind of also like made me give up on the team, because like I was trying to like get Chet on the team as a coach, because he got replaced on 100 Thieves, and it wasn't even because Imapet was a bad coach. It was just because like I worked with Chet for 3.5 years. Like I have tenure with him. I have experience with him. It's just like a no-brainer decision for me, at least. And I wasn't even saying like to replace Imapet, like assistant coach, analyst, whatever. Like keep him here, but like I was like, I need Chet to like continue pretty much, and that wasn't like Gen.G's logic. Kind of was like, you know, we want to land, and we kind of want to keep the lineup until lands come back, and I'm like, lands might not come back for fucking like 3 years.
No one
like,
knew back then.
Knows? Yeah. So I was like, we're literally just gonna keep this lineup forever, and like Sam left with me just because Sam agreed with me. And Kusta was kind of like 50-50, and you know, it just COVID killed the team essentially. I mean, pretty obvious.
Yeah. Why was it the obvious connection that you were formerly in NRG and you all them? Why was NRG the team you went to Valorant? Is that just purely coincidental? You ended up in that team again?
Just I have a really good relationship with Andy and like Jamie and like all this, like a lot of the staff that works there, honestly. So, I mean, it's just like a place where I can trust the org to let me do what I want. But honestly, looking back, like switching to Valorant was like an impulsive decision. Just because like I said, I wasn't in the best state mentally during that time, and I wasn't like, honestly, I should have just taken a break. Like looking back, like I was not mentally fit to like switch to a new game and then run a completely new team in a new game, and yeah, it was just like a rough period. But going to NRG was a no-brainer for me, just because my relationship with the org.
Were you one of those people? Because to be fair, one of the reasons I personally, by the way, have never blamed people playing some Valorant if they're a CSGO pro is like, one, as long as you do your CSGO hours, I mean, at the end of that could be anime, could be fucking out in a nightclub, who cares? Like, do what you want with your extra time. But I'd also say this, because it all happened, remember, Valorant came out like basically the moment we all went online in bloody CSGO, the beta. So like a lot of people were playing it because everyone was just stuck in their house all day. Like, that's why loads of the pro, I remember in Flashpoint 1, the joke was almost everyone was on the side playing Valorant at the same time, because it came out in that exact time period, if you remember. So were you someone who'd already like sort of put in a bunch of hours? Did you know Valorant was a game you could play?
I played it a bit, but I wasn't one of the people who was like all in on it while they were playing CS. Like I played a few 10-mans here and there, just like
that's a bit wild then
fun.
To make that big career pivot then if you hadn't even really like played the game a ton.
I agree with you, it is, but my logic was just like, I can't really do anything on Gen.G anymore, and I couldn't make like the changes I want. Because like another change I wanted to make was I was going to pick up Nitro for Bentet, but that wasn't possible either. So I just like couldn't really do anything on Gen.G in terms of like my vision for like what I had. And that just pushed Psalm and I away to Valorant pretty much, because Psalm and I were like, we can't really do what we want here, and you know, I didn't really have anything against anyone on the Gen.G team either. Like, if COVID never happened, like, we probably would have been a really good team, honestly. But it just didn't work out, and mentally I wasn't in the place to like continue CS at the time. I just like needed something new. It wasn't like I liked Valorant more than CS, it was just I needed like a fresh scenery pretty much.
The other funny thing is as well, people did treat Valorant like it was just like a retirement home. It's just people getting big checks doing nothing. But it's like, I want to just tell you guys, if you don't know the game, not if you're the fucking in-game leader, that's a game that has in, essentially, you can put infinite hours into that game as an in-game leader. Because I always tell people this, because they combined FPS and MOBA. Well, remember, in MOBA, what you do is you ban the character. That's what's OP, right? And in CS, the character's the same, so you ban the map. They just ban the map. The agent, if the agent's OP, you just have to use it. You have to play with it. You have to play against it. Also, there's a million, all the utility, the ults. Like, there's so much info in that game. I actually think it's a super complicated, specifically to be IGL or coach. I think it's a really complicated game, mate. Like, if people were thinking you were going to go over there and just sort of cruise, I bet it's actually, if you said you were a bit burned out, I bet it was hard to adapt to this new game, right?
Well, like, the reason I regret it is because honestly, when I went to NRG, I played Valorant for 6-7 months, and I didn't put the time I did into CS into it.
Right.
Like, I was like low key collecting a paycheck, and that's why I ended up switching back to CS, even though I was making less money in CS. Because I was just like, I feel bad like doing this to NRG, like an org that's shown me so much, and I was like not in a good mental place to like actually even switch. So I just like didn't put the time in I should have. I wasn't in a good headspace to even like run a team in that game, and I didn't give it my all. So it's hard for me to like even know if I would have been a good IGL, to be honest, because I wasn't ever like in love with the game or even like wanted to play it, to be honest, to some extent. Like at the very start, I wanted to play it, and then like after 2 months of scrimming like MDL players in it, and just like thinking the things I'm doing are correct, and then I just get rushed like 10 rounds in a row by like things that are impossible to stop. I'm just like, honestly, this game's not for me.
Right, when you came back to CSGO, people will forget, just as you said, there was previously moves where you could have just been a player in EG again. But you obviously initially came back as the coach, like at the end, basically when we came back to land, you were coaching briefly. But then you did it for like a period of time, then you didn't, and then there was a time before you came to Liquid. So what happened with that scenario? Was it never supposed to be a full-time coaching gig in EG? Why was it only for a certain period of time?
Well, like initially, when I was playing Valorant still, I got messaged by, I think it was CeRq and Brehze, and they actually wanted me to come back and replace Stanislaw as IGL.
Actually, as a player again,
and,
right?
Yeah, as a player again. And I actually ended up saying no to that. I said I'd rather coach. I didn't want to like go from Valorant back to CS and play Tier 1 CS with like not playing for a year. So I ended up just wanting to coach, and I felt like that was like the better career path for me, just because even though I do enjoy playing sometimes still, it's, you know, I just don't feel like I am good enough, to be honest, to play Tier 1 CS anymore. So that was like the main reason. Like I can still call it a Tier 1 level in my opinion, but in terms of like actually playing, and like I just didn't like have the drive to come on and like deathmatch and keep my form up. But I enjoy like the process of like creating the game and being in the room and going to the events. But I like everything else. I just didn't enjoy like the keeping my form up anymore. So that was like the main reason I switched to coaching, honestly.
The only thing I find crazy though, dude, is I get that Liquid obviously will always be a controversial team if they're not on top, because like the fans always expect so much, and they had so many years, like 2018, 2019, where they were amazing and they were like second or third best in the world, or at times the best, obviously, right? But I feel like, mad, your period in Team Liquid's gone mad under the radar. Because all I'll add is this: first of all, when Adren was the coach, people just never even mentioned the coach. Like he never got flamed, even, dude. Like he used to just sort of be invisible, and they'd win or lose the game. And then when you came in, your problem is this: you came in exactly the time that fucking YEKINDAR came. So obviously they see YEKINDAR in the games, one of the best players on Liquid, and has had a big impact. So they look at the results and they're like, it's because YEKINDAR came. It's like, guys, that exact same tournament, IEM Cologne, was when Daps joined as the coach. Like, that's when Team Liquid went from being like also ran like, who cares really? Kind of like a slightly better version of what EG is now, to like an actual relevant team that mixes it up. It's always a playoff team. You're a team that's obviously been able to beat the big squads. Like, you've had a big impact on Team Liquid, right? It seems like you've sort of found your footing as a coach.
Yeah, like my time at EG was, I honestly, I don't even count EG as like myself coaching, to be honest. Like, the team was dead when I joined, and I wasn't allowed to make any changes, and I was promised I could make changes, and then I couldn't make changes, and then Malik came in, and then I left. Decided to leave. So like, and I played for like 3 months too, just because Stanislaw wasn't there. So that wasn't that, like, Liquid is technically like my first real coaching job where I'm like, this is my career path now. And definitely at the start, like, I've just been trying to find my footing, because like I'm taking everything that I've learned from every coach I've had, with the good and the bad. Like I even had like Mustang as a coach, and like Paulie, and like I've had so many coaches, just like taking little bits and pieces. But like, the main thing I don't like is coaches who like forced their vision completely on a team. Like, the truth is if you're someone who's played before, the IGL has the most control by far. It's like, as much as no matter how good a coach is, like, during the game the coach has not that much impact compared to the IGL. It's like night and day. The coach might have like 5% impact compared to 95% of the IGL or second IGL. So it's like, my philosophy is like really just supporting like YEKINDAR and Nitro the most, and just like helping them create the game that they want to play, instead of like coming in and being, oh, I used to like do all this on NRG. Like, obviously I still bring strats and stuff, and they'll be like, yes, this is good, yes, this is bad, like, we won't do this. And I've added like a good amount to the game, taken good things from other teams, but overall it's like YEKINDAR and Nitro together with me in the room, and we're just working together, and we build the system together. We've multiple we haven't really had boot camps this year, which has hurt us, but the end of last year we had like 4 long boot camps, which really helped us, and we'd be in the practice room till like 3-4 a.m. like almost every night, just like making our game, completely redoing maps together. And you know, it's been a pretty good dynamic so far.
It's an obvious question to ask, but you had to feel like you could have won that Pro League. I mean, you were basically that close, right? It was like that far away.
I mean, we definitely should have won that event. That one slipped away for sure. Yeah, especially overpass. I remember the one round where Zywu just walked out spawn and just 1-1v2. There was like a lot of rounds we should have won on overpass. Vertigo, whatever. Vertigo was our worst map, so we wouldn't have won on Vertigo anyways. But yeah, we let that slip through the cracks for sure.
Right, obviously, many moons ago, you did play with Nitro when he was just a player and you was IGL way back at the beginning of the interview, if people remember. I didn't reference his name for those teams, to be fair. Right, but he himself had the Valorant period where he was away and he came back, and people wondered, is he still Nitro? Does he have the feel for the game? How's he going to work his way back in? Is he just here to get a check? Because all these questions swirling around him, right? How would you say you and him have synced up? Because it seems like you've both kind of got your style now. Like, the Team Liquid style's set and people kind of know what to make for it now. But I see that also as when you joined me. That's when I feel like they crystallise what the squad is. So who is Nitro's and IGL now, and what's kind of your rapport with him like?
I mean, our rapport has always been good. Like, Nitro's been one of the players I've talked to even when I wasn't on a team with him.
Oh, okay.
So I've always had like a good relationship with him, going back to when we were on Denial together. And like, to add to that, it's kind of like just like the relationship with YEKINDAR, Nitro, and I is sort of like a trio. It's like we do almost everything together in terms of like, we prep together, we do all the game, like all the maps together. And then even recently, like, Elige also has been pretty vocal, coming into the room talking about things. So like, my main thing has just been like making sure the environment's good with everyone as best we can. Like, we've had a lot of team talks when like things start getting a little bumpy, just like clearing the air, being like more open about talking about things with each other, just because like I've seen it too many times in my career where like things build up and players like hide things and don't want to like confront people. Like, especially since like our team is made up of 4 introverts and YEKINDAR. So it's like having that dialogue or sort of like me helping bridge the gap between like people who maybe don't want to like be confronted by an extrovert is something that like I've been trying to help with essentially.
By the way, along those lines, like that's something I want to ask about because to me, even though YEKINDAR was obviously like I testified a really good player when he was on Virtus Pro / Outsiders, like to me that's not a play you just pick up and drop somewhere else and go, yeah, just go ahead. Like not only is he moving to a totally different region, he's coming from playing with Russians to fucking North Americans, but also like he probably had the most extreme playing style you could ever see in that whole team. Like they were the massive betas, and he was the most ridiculous like plus W religion guy of all time. And people know in that team either he got the opening kill and they were 5v4, they would just win, like grind the game out, or he'd die and it'd be 4v5 and they're not going to win the round. Like it was, I imagine integrating a player like that's not easy. Like I'm sure you have to get them involved with the team and you have to get a sense of what they're trying to accomplish in the game, right? Like that style he has, people know it's feast or famine. It's either amazing or it can be really hard to work with. So what's it like to play with a player like this?
Well, I think like logically it sounds like it's hard to integrate, but since when YEKINDAR and I joined, Liquid was essentially like a dead team with Shocks, because I don't think they even practiced with Shocks like the last month they were together.
Okay.
So like YEKINDAR and I came into a team that pretty much like was bare bones. So we literally just started from scratch. Like I wanted to make sure we didn't skip over like a single, no matter like how experienced some of the players are, I was like, we're not going to skip over like a single detail.
Okay.
We're going to like go through all the basics again. Make sure no stones left unturned, just in case maybe someone doesn't know something. And that helped YEKINDAR a lot as well, because YEKINDAR could bring in like James stuff from like VP. So it's like YEKINDAR helped integrate himself in a way where like we're all integrating together rather than like me and YEKINDAR getting integrated into like Nitro's system. So we just literally redid everything the second we joined. And it wasn't like the same team from whatever was there with Shocks.
Right, the weirdest thing to me is this. With the exception of the recent Pro League, the only tournament that sucked in this time period, sadly, was the major. Like, people forget because they won't remember who you lost to, but like, you were this close to making playoffs in the major. And if you make that, by the way, that's probably the most wide open playoff bracket ever. Hence why Outsiders won. You know, like if Furia was in the semis. What went wrong at the major for you?
Pressure, like 100%. I mean, the game we threw the hardest was we were winning like 12-12 versus Heroic CT side overpass, and I think all of us had 10k, 12k money. Like we were in the driver's seat for that match, and it just like fell through the cracks. And even in Spirit on Ancient, I think we played Spirit on Ancient, and that also was very winnable. I think one of the negatives, it's kind of funny because like before Pro League, where we made the finals versus Vitality, that was like one of our worst boot camps before that event. And then we ended up like having a lot of issues and like dealing with them at the event, and then like grinding back and doing well in playoffs. And then before Rio, that was like by far the best boot camp we ever had as a team. Like dominating people, like everything's going well, like all our new stuff's working really well. And just when we got to the event, it just felt like the pressure of like what like making playoffs just kind of like hit us to some extent. It was like the first time I had seen it in the team, at least. Like I had never seen, and I maybe like the being on stage for every match played a factor, but it's hard to say like what caused it. Probably just because it's a major.
Because the other thing I want to point out is this. If it had only been the Pro League finals, then fine, people would say it was a fluke or it was like honeymoon period with YEKINDAR still or whatever. But I'll just point this out to people. So Pro League, you were in the final, you narrowly lost to Vitality. Major happened, okay, put that to one side. Then you had the Blast Fall Finals, where you lost to Heroic there in the semis, and close. They won the tournament. Then you had the Blast World Finals, you were in the final, you lost to G2. Like, these, you only lose to the winner in some of these tournaments. Like, these are all winnable tournaments, basically. Like, have you had that feeling like it's this close again? It reminds me of the NRG period almost. Like, you're not that far. Like, I know it might look like it if you don't win a bunch of times, but each match you're in, you have to feel like I'm in with a chance to win one of these.
Oh, we always, like, I think actually after Katowice, we had beat the 3 teams at Katowice we had never beat before in the top, like, 15 teams. So we now have beaten every top team at one point or another. So it's like we know we can beat any team. It's just really about us like coming together at the right moments, like everyone showing up at the same time, making sure our mental is staying strong. Like our mental has been pretty good, I'd say, for like the majority of the time I've been here. There's been like a few slip ups in certain matches, but overall, like people have been pretty calm, composed. You know, I'm trying to like help create an environment that's like good and consistent, and we're not like completely changing like the pressure of the match compared to like how we practice, like trying to keep it as stable as possible. And now it's just about us like finding like at this last RMR we just played, and even like at Pro League, yeah, it was the last event before this, like we've just been making like a lot more individual mistakes lately, and it's honestly just from lack of boot camps. We had one week boot camp before the blast groups at the start of the year, and that's it. So we went from like 4 long boot camps at the end of last year to like 1 week this year. So we have a big boot camp coming up before the Paris major, and like our main goal this whole year was just the major anyways. So everything that matters for our team is that event. That's what we've put all our energy into, and that has to be a success.
Right. Obviously, as we talked about earlier in the interview, you had Naf in your early days, and now you get to actually coach him on Team Liquid. And I would even say the time period when you've been his coach, he's actually had sort of a renaissance of form. Like he's playing some of his best CS for years, and you'd have to go back to the Grand Slam era probably to find when he was playing as well. Who is Naf the player in today's game in 2023 compared to that young fucking punk you knew when he was 16 or whatever?
I'd say the biggest difference is, I mean, I've talked to Naf about this before, actually. I think the most important team he ever played in was actually the Renegades lineup, because that was the first time in his career where he like took ownership of like, I'm the best player on this team, and I need to like.
I heard he just said, I want my spots, basically.
Yeah. Like he essentially is like, give me what I want, and I'll like carry, essentially. He obviously didn't say that, but like that's essentially what he said. But it's just like, from that point on, he's like knows he's just as good or better than like any player he's playing against. Like he doesn't have any doubt anymore in terms of that kind of thing, and that's why he's been one of the most consistent players for the last like 4-5 years, you could say.
By the way, what would you actually say, if you think of yourself, I want to see how you actually conceive of your own self in CSGO and esports. Do you feel like you've been underrated in your career? Do you think people either get what you do? Do they get what your style? Because I've always felt like, for example, I know on my side, on the analysis side, a lot of people are very reductive about your style. They think you just like do basic shit, or you just sort of like the star players do whatever they want. I don't know what the fucking vision is. Like they don't seem to give you like proper credit as like an actual like mind in the game, and you have a vision of how it should be played and a set approach, etc. Do people get Daps' style, do you think?
It's hard to like, because it's like based on time period, right? Like the analysis of like my calling being bad like earlier in my career would be correct. Like I called very puggy 4-1s, nothing like too focused on macro that was like super intricate by any means. Like we would call some basic like obviously on like Inferno you have to default, so it's like I'd say like as a player, as an individual, like I wasn't that great, to be honest. Like I'd have some moments, and like I held my own to some extent, but like as an IGL, like I felt like I was never really like struggling to play versus any of the teams after like 2018. Like I felt like I completely understood the game and like what was needed, and you know, I probably could have done like some things better looking back from what I know now, but overall, like I didn't really struggle after 2018 in my head in terms of like calling versus the best teams.
Do you think you are someone where if obviously CSGO is almost over, we're going to go to CS2 in the summer and then the first majors next year, right? If everything works out, are you someone who could be like, could you be in CS, if CS continues in esport, could you be in this game for another 5 years? Is coaching the role for you? Have you even thought maybe in CS2 I'll play again? Has that even been something that's come to the mind at all?
I mean, I honestly haven't thought like about CS2 that much. Like I said, my whole focus is on the Paris major, and that's like literally what we've planned to do. I mean, there's chances for anything. Like I don't want to like write off anything, but there's no like plans to play again.
Do you feel like a guy who's here for long term though?
Yeah, I feel like I do, or I feel like I am. Like I enjoy CS. I've played CS since 2006.
By the way, did that aspect, when you went to Valorant, did it also sort, because there's a famous saying that, like, it's actually a British saying that says, like, what do they of England know? Those who only England know. And the premise is that you have to travel to actually realise what your home place is like why it's different or whatever. Did going to Valorant sort of, like, actually make you realise that you're actually super passionate about CS? Was that part of the conclusion?
Yeah, after the first, like, 2 weeks in Valorant, I kind of knew that, honestly. So, I mean, I've loved CS since 2006. I've played it since then. It's been my career since I stopped going to university. So, I mean, I've been here for a long time, or like, it's even crazy to think that I've been like salaried since 2015. Like, that even to me is surreal, because my whole goal when CSGO came out was just to go to like a local LAN, like go to like a LAN ETS or something.
Right, okay.
Like my goal was never to go pro at all. Like I was just going to university and just like wanted to like go to a LAN to see what it was like. So
I see.
So I've been here for almost a decade now, and in terms of like pro level, so hopefully it's another decade.
What about then, since we talked about the interview, another guy I also thought never got his credit was fucking Chet, Imapet. Like, it must be cool to see all the success he's had in Valorant, where if people don't know, his team basically was the best in the world that last year.
I mean, I think people just, it's hard to like see what coaches do in terms of like a tangible aspect, because it's just like coaches who like yell a lot or like motivate teams, it's easier to spot and be like, that guy's a good coach objectively. But like, Chet Chet was the hardest working coach I ever had by far. It's not even close. And that isn't shown because he's like a very passive person. He's not like cheering, like picking up players after they win and stuff, like anything like that. Like he's pretty reserved person, but like he understands everything about the game and he knows how to help a team. And he just because he's reserved doesn't mean he's not personable. Like he builds good relationships with his players. Players trust him, and to me, that's like what's needed, to be honest.
Right, you could pick what era. It could be coaching, could be playing. What would you pick out if you had to pick? Like, what's your favorite or your most memorable match you played in CS:GO? What would you take?
Most memorable match, probably. Oh, that's a hard one. I have two. Probably making my first major versus Hellraisers with Optic.
Okay.
Or the Cloud9 match at ESA LAN.
Oh, so it's actually not even the biggest matches of your career. It's more like momentous ones in your career, I guess, right?
Like the ones that like started the career, like made it seem real, essentially. Like obviously, like beating Astralis is cool, and like beating Liquid and all that stuff's cool, but like, to me, those matches kind of just like all combined to one, especially since I didn't win the event. You know, obviously it probably would have been more if I like won the event. But like the ones where it's like, this is like my career now. Those are kind of more sentimental to me.
Okay. Will it mean something to you when you win a big tournament?
100%. That's been the main goal forever. I mean, I've won a few LANs, but they haven't been the biggest ones. So definitely getting like a big one is the main goal, especially the major.
Right, here's the thing. I like to do a few quick fire questions if people have been in enough teams, and you've been with a bunch of the NA talent. In fact, the crazy thing, by the way, as an aside, is the sheer amount of people who became in-game leaders after playing with you is ridiculous, mate. Like, you've played with about 5 people that have been IGLs after that, so I don't know what that implies. But here's the first quick fire question. Of all the players you played with in your career, who do you think was the most skilled teammate you had?
Skilled, probably Brehze.
Wow, okay. In what regard, what was so impressive to you?
I mean, if we're talking about skill, mechanically, I don't think any player I played with, like, obviously there's some that are close to him, but like Brehze in his absolute best form, the best player I played with, skill-wise.
What about who would be the smartest player you played with?
Smartest player, probably Ethan, in terms of like how
Okay.
much he helped me. I'd say Ethan was probably the best like all around teammate I played with in my career.
Ah, okay. And what about who is the most clutch player you've played with?
Most clutch player, probably like Naf or CeRq. CeRq had the most clutches actually for our team in 2018 or 2019. Like Naf or CeRq for that one.
Right, and this is a classic one because it's a bit trickier. Who is the most underrated player you've played with? Because you've got, to be fair, quite a few of your teammates I feel like were underrated. So there must be a good one in here. Who did people not think was that good, but actually they were like either they do something you don't notice or they're low-key just better than you think?
Oh, actually, it's Kusta.
Oh,
Kusta's
okay.
the most underrated for sure. Like Kusta was the best player on Gen.G for like the first 6 months. If you go back and look at the stats, even statistically, he was like the best player.
Right.
But in terms of like what he added to the team, I know like Simple called him like the worst player he ever played with in one of the interviews, but like he's like a different person like later on in his career.
Oh, and that was many years before. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, sure.
So like Kusta on Gen.G was like very underrated in terms of like what he added to the team. Good all around player as well. Like kind of like a mini Ethan in a way.
Right, at the end of this interview, do you have like a final message for people? Anyone you want to thank or say hello to?
I don't want to just because like I'm gonna leave people out for sure. Just I'm happy to be here. Thank you to the fans, and let's go for 10 more years.
The Beatles said they get by with a little help from their friends, but I get by with a little help from my Patreon community. And this video was kindly supported by Matt Pugnaccio Racula, Ahmed Haju, Bot Pounder 420, Toucan, Animosity, Tobias Bernasconi, Jensen Gore, Tosh, and a special thanks always goes out to my main man, Jerky's Minion. Would you like to ask me a question in my monthly video AMA? Do you want teasers to find out who are the upcoming guests? Maybe you want to take part in one of those lengthy but intense esports discussions I have with my donators, or maybe you want to suggest a guest or a topic that I could cover. Well, if any of those tickle your fancy, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati today, where in the description box below there is a Patreon link.